We live in an incredible time where movies are viewed in virtual reality, three-dimensional, first-person, and high definition, all thanks to the last 150 years. Starting with the earliest methods and theories around the world to develop motion pictures, each device was inspired by the last. But does anyone really remember how we got to where we are today? My name is Richard Service from Pensacola, Florida, and I'm here to help inspire you to create our next big step forward. Here's a brief lesson explaining how we got to the video cameras we have today. Progressing from the use of magic lanterns in the 17th century, we got our first look at a photograph in 1827 when Claude Niepce captured a view from his window, transferring it to a glass plate, which took over 8 hours of exposure to develop. In the time between 1832 and 1834, we're given the phenakistoscope and zoetrope, which were introduced as toys. By viewing the rapidly spinning painted images on a wheel in either toy, the viewer's eyes were tricked into perceiving the image in motion, much the same as a flipbook is viewed today. For the next 40 years, attempts were seldom to further develop the motion picture as the camera had become more popular. However, in 1870, inventors such as Edward Muybridge and Etienne Murray made a few interesting discoveries that would reboot the motion picture venture. Muybridge was asked to help settle a bet placed on a horse track in 1878. The bet was to determine if, when galloping, all four of the horse's hooves left the ground at the same time. In order to investigate this query, Muybridge set up a series of tripwires, each triggering a camera to take a photo as the horse passed by. Viewing these developed photos in order created a sense of motion, and the desire to improve on this method grew. The race for developing a motion picture had begun. A few years later, in 1882, Etienne Murray created a rotating film hopper, looking very similar to a gun, and received the nickname the camera gun. As the picture was captured, the hopper would rotate and was set up for the next photo. He used this device to capture objects and people in motion. Finally, in 1888, the world sees its first patented film camera. After the Frenchman Louis Le Prince had evolved his 16-lens camera into an 8-lens and then down to a single-lens camera, he was creating motion pictures. A year later, in 1889, Le Prince filmed a short story titled The Roundhay Garden in 12 frames per second and Leeds Bridge at 20 frames per second, using a celluloid film created by inventor George Eastman in the same year. Also using Eastman's film, in 1891, inventor Thomas Edison, with the large efforts of his assistant William Dixon, revealed the kinetograph camera and the kinetoscope viewing box. 3 years later, in 1894, the Lumiere family, inspired by Edison's camera, created the cinematograph, which shot motion pictures at a slower 16 frames per second rather than Edison's 46 frames per second, becoming the standard film rate for the next 25 years. Over the next few years, different versions of motion pictures surfaced, but nothing new extraordinarily pushing the boundaries until 1909, when the Polish inventor Kazimierz Polanski devised the first handheld, crank-free camera, the aeroscope. As other cameras relied on the operator to crank the film in recession, Kazimier's camera was self-rotating and could be held sturdier with both hands and be taken to new heights and places like the sky. Invented in 1960, we got our first look at Technicolor, which used two colored filters, red and green, to translate color to film. 10 years later, in 1926, the first multi-plane camera was invented by Charlotte Riediger for animated films. By the 1940s, cameras were rapidly evolving from film to VHS to digital recordings, making its appearance in 1980. From here, the rest is today's history, and we're surrounded by films recorded using digital methods. From magic lanterns to paper to celluloid film to VHS and digital recordings, where do we go from here? You tell us. Thanks for watching.